The arena was filled with the deep, rhythmic sounds of Salakari warriors stomping their clawed feet against the hard stone floor. The circular battleground, carved into the heart of their fortress, was a sacred place where only the strongest warriors proved their worth. Today, the young warrior Tavares stood at the center, his chest puffed out with pride, his sharp mandibles clicking in excitement. Tavares was not just any warrior. He was born into a family of strong fighters, and his body was built for battle. His exoskeleton, dark blue and layered like armor, shone under the glow of the arena's torches. His 4 muscular arms twitched in anticipation as he waited for his opponent. Today, he would prove himself. Today, he would show the humans that they were nothing compared to the strength of the Salakari. The crowd grew silent as the heavy metal doors on the opposite side of the arena slid open with a deep mechanical groan. A human stepped through, his armored boots clanking against the floor. He was tall for his kind, though still smaller than Tavares. His body was covered in thick, dark combat armor, with glowing blue lines running along the chest and shoulders. His helmet had a sleek visor that hid his face. Tavares let out a sharp, clicking laugh. So this was the human warrior. He had heard stories of humans, how they had spread across the stars, how they had fought creatures stronger than themselves and survived. But Tavares never believed they were a true warrior species. Unlike the Salakari, humans were soft, weak. They relied too much on their technology to survive. "You hide in metal," Tavares said, his voice deep and full of amusement. "Without your armor, you are nothing." The human did not react. He simply stood there, his body relaxed, his hands resting at his sides. Tavares took a step forward and spread his 4 arms wide, flexing his claws. "Do you not speak, human, or are you afraid?" Finally, the human lifted his visor, revealing a pair of sharp, focused eyes. His face was lined with experience, his short, dark hair streaked with hints of gray. He was older than Tavares expected, but something about his expression made the young warrior uneasy. This was not the face of someone afraid. This was the face of someone who had seen too many battles to be impressed by one more. "My name is Sergeant David Kane," the human said. His voice was calm, steady, "and I'm not here to talk." The Salakari warriors in the stands let out a chorus of growls and hisses, their equivalent of laughter. They expected this fight to be over quickly. Tavares, the strongest of his generation, against a human who relied on machines to survive. It was no contest. A deep voice from above echoed through the arena. It was the High Commander, the eldest and most respected warrior of the Salakari. "The challenge is set," he announced. "Fight with honor. Prove your strength." The gong rang, and the match began. Tavares moved first, his powerful legs launching him forward at incredible speed, his claws extended, aiming straight for the human's armored chest. If he could land a single strike, the fight would be over in seconds. But Kane was faster than expected. He sidestepped with a smooth, practiced motion, causing Tavares to rush past him. Before the young warrior could turn, something heavy slammed into his side. Kane had countered with his own attack, a solid punch that sent vibrations through Tavares' exoskeleton. It did not hurt, but it surprised him. Tavares spun around, narrowing his eyes. This human knew how to fight. "No more running," Tavares growled. He lunged again, this time using all 4 of his arms to attack from different angles. Kane blocked 2 strikes with his armored forearms, ducked under the 3rd, and caught the 4th with his gloved hand. With a sharp twist, he redirected Tavares' momentum, throwing the young warrior off balance. Tavares stumbled back, his pride burning hotter than any injury. This was impossible. How was a human, a creature without claws, without natural armor, keeping up with him? The crowd murmured in confusion. The match was supposed to be quick, but the human was holding his own. Kane took a step forward, his posture still relaxed, but now there was something different in his eyes. Not arrogance, not fear, just calm confidence. "I thought you were stronger," Kane said, his tone neutral. Tavares growled, his claws digging into the stone beneath him. This was far from over. He would show the human what true strength meant. As the battle continued, the young warrior would soon learn a lesson he would never forget. Tavares clenched his claws, his forearms twitching with frustration. He had expected the fight to end quickly. A single strike should have been enough to crush the human's flimsy body beneath his strength. But Sergeant David Kane was still standing. Worse, he wasn't even breathing heavily. The arena was silent now. The Saliquary warriors who had been cheering moments ago were watching with confusion. Their strongest young fighter was struggling against a human. Tavares refused to accept this. With a deep growl, he charged again, moving with the speed of a trained warrior. His powerful legs propelled him forward. And this time, he was ready for the human's tricks. Kane had dodged before, but Tavares would not let him escape again. At the last second, he feinted, pretending to strike with his upper arms while sweeping with his lower arms instead. It was a tactic that had fooled many enemies before, but as his lower claws slashed through the air, he hit nothing. Kane was already gone. Tavares barely had time to react before something slammed into his ribs, a precise, forceful strike that sent vibrations through his exoskeleton. He staggered back, shocked. The human had dodged and countered in the same motion. Kane still didn't speak. He didn't need to. His body language said everything. He was testing Tavares, watching, learning. Tavares roared in frustration and came at him again, striking with all four arms in a whirlwind of sharp claws and brute force. No more tricks. No more testing. Just power. For a moment, it seemed impossible for Kane to avoid all the attacks, but he did. He weaved between the strikes with a level of precision that didn't seem natural for a species without enhanced reflexes. He blocked when necessary, using his armored forearms to absorb blows. He sidestepped when he could, moving just enough to avoid full contact. And then he struck again. Fast, precise, devastating. A punch to the stomach, a sharp kick to the knee joint, a strike to the jaw that rattled Tavares' senses. The young warrior stumbled. He shook his head, disbelief creeping in. How? How was the human keeping up with him? Tavares was bigger, stronger, faster. His exoskeleton was built for war. His species had dominated battlefields for generations. But this human, wrapped in his metal armor, was fighting with a different kind of strength, one that did not come from claws or natural armor. Tavares' pride burned. No, he would not lose. Letting out a deep, echoing roar, he leaped into the air, preparing to bring his full weight down onto the human. Kane raised his arms, ready. The two warriors clashed again, the sounds of battle filling the air. But something was changing. Tavares felt it. The battle was no longer about proving who was stronger. It was something else entirely. And for the first time, a seed of doubt crept into his mind. Tavares growled, his forearms clenched into tight fists. His breathing was heavy now, his powerful chest rising and falling as he glared at the human. This was not how the fight was supposed to go. Sergeant David Kane stood a few steps away, his stance relaxed but ready. His combat armor, though scratched from the battle, still held strong. But what disturbed Tavares the most wasn't the armor. It was the man inside it. The human did not look tired. He was not panicking. He was calm, focused, studying Tavares like a puzzle he was about to solve. The Saliquary warrior shook his head. No, I will not be humiliated. With a furious snarl, he charged again. This time, he didn't just attack, he unleashed everything. His forearms moved in perfect sync, striking from multiple angles. His claws slashed through the air, aiming for weak points in the human's armor. His legs propelled him forward with deadly speed. The human should not have been able to keep up, and yet he did. Kane dodged, ducked, and deflected with precise movements. He never wasted energy, never panicked. He moved just enough to avoid being hit and countered when he saw an opening. and he always found an opening. A sharp punch landed on Tavoris's ribs. A sudden elbow strike smashed into his shoulder joint. A kick to the knee sent a jolt of pain through his leg. The young warrior stumbled back, gasping. Pain. Real pain. For the first time, he felt something he had never experienced in battle before. Doubt. The crowd of Zalakari warriors, once cheering and laughing, had fallen silent. They were watching closely now, their eyes filled with something unfamiliar. Uncertainty. Tavoris felt his claws tighten. His whole life, he had been told that Zalakari were the strongest. Their exoskeletons made them nearly invincible. Their natural weapons made them superior in battle. They had conquered planets, defeated countless enemies. But now, standing in front of this human, he realized something terrifying. Strength alone was not enough. Cain was not stronger than him. He was not faster. He was not covered in thick armor plates or equipped with claws. But he did not need those things. He fought differently. Smarter. Every move was calculated. Every strike aimed with purpose. He had studied Tavoris in the middle of battle, adapting with every second that passed. Humans adapt. That thought sent a chill down Tavoris's spine. He had been laughing at Cain's armor before. He had thought the human was weak without it. But now he was starting to wonder, what happens when he takes it off? Tavoris stood frozen, his chest rising and falling as he struggled to make sense of what was happening. His exoskeleton ached from the blows, and his mind raced with doubt. The human, Sergeant David Cain, was still standing. He was not struggling, not gasping for breath like a creature pushed beyond its limits. He was calm, focused, and worst of all, he looked disappointed. Tavoris clenched his claws, his pride burning hotter than any pain. How was this human still in control? The Zalakari warrior had fought many battles before. He had trained against the strongest of his kind, crushed lesser species with his raw power. Yet here, in the sacred arena of his people, he was facing something he did not understand. Cain tilted his head slightly. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he reached up and began removing his armor. The arena fell silent. Tavoris's mandibles clicked in confusion. The Zalakari warriors in the crowd murmured in disbelief. Was this a joke? No warrior would discard his armor in the middle of battle. It was suicide. Stupid, reckless, or was it something worse? Cain continued without hesitation. The heavy combat plating detached piece by piece, falling to the stone floor with dull metallic thuds. His gauntlets, his boots, his chest plate. And then, finally, the last piece was gone. The human stood there in nothing but his simple undershirt and combat pants. No protection, no technology, just him. Tavoris felt his claws tighten. He had expected to see weakness, soft, pale flesh barely capable of withstanding a single blow. A body that relied on armor for survival. But what he saw instead made his blood run cold. Cain was not weak. His body, though lacking an exoskeleton, was built with dense muscle, shaped by years of discipline and struggle. His skin bore scars, each one a story of battles fought and survived. His arms and legs, though lacking the natural weapons of the Zalakari, looked like they had been carved from stone. And then there were his eyes. Before, the helmet had hidden them. Now, without the visor, Tavoris could see them clearly. They were not the eyes of prey. They were not filled with fear or hesitation. They were sharp, focused, unyielding. For the first time in his life, Tavoris felt something he had never known before. Fear. The young warrior took an unconscious step back, his mind screaming at him to run. But Cain did not move. He simply stood there, waiting. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. "You laughed at my armor," Cain said, his gaze steady. "You thought I needed it." Tavoris swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Let me show you why I don't." Tavares felt his claws twitch as he stared at the human. Sergeant David Kane stood before him, without armor, without weapons, without any protection. And yet, he did not look weak. No, he looked stronger than ever. The silence in the arena was heavy. The Talakari warriors, who had once laughed and cheered, were now speechless. They had never seen a fighter remove their armor in battle. It was unheard of. A warrior's armor was their greatest defense, their proof of strength. But Kane had cast his aside like it was nothing. Tavares's mandibles clicked in uncertainty. His heart pounded in his chest. What kind of creature was this? The human took a slow step forward, not rushing, not attacking, just walking. Tavares stiffened. Every instinct told him to strike first, to use this moment to end the fight. But his body did not move. His claws, which had been so eager to tear through armor before, now felt useless. The way Kane moved, it was different. Before, he had been fast and precise, but now, without the heavy armor, his movements were even smoother. Every step was controlled, every shift of his muscles calculated. He had been holding back. Tavares clenched his jaw. No, this was his fight, his moment to prove himself. He was Talakari, a warrior. He would not let a human defeat him. With a deep roar, he lunged forward, all four arms striking at once. His claws gleamed under the torchlight as they sliced through the air, aiming straight for the human's unprotected body. For a fraction of a second, Tavares thought he had won. Then, Kane moved, faster than before, faster than Tavares could track. The human ducked under the first strike, twisted past the second, and caught the third wrist with his bare hand. Tavares's mind went blank. Impossible. The grip was iron. The human's fingers wrapped around his wrist like a vice, and before Tavares could react, Kane pulled. A sudden force yanked the Talakari off balance. His massive body, so much larger than the human's, was being controlled. Kane shifted his stance, using Tavares' own momentum against him. The next thing he knew, slam! Tavares' back hit the ground with a force that made the entire arena shake. The impact sent a shock through his body. His exoskeleton absorbed some of it, but the pain still exploded through his limbs. The crowd gasped. Tavares could not move. His mind raced in panic. How? A human, a creature without claws, without armor, without natural strength, had just thrown him like he weighed nothing. Kane let go of his wrist and stepped back. Tavares groaned, struggling to get up. His arms shook. His legs felt weak. For the first time in his life, he felt something no Talakari warrior ever expected to feel. Helpless. Kane looked down at him, his expression unreadable. He was not mocking. He was not gloating. He simply spoke. You rely on armor, on size, on weapons. Kane's voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Humans don't. Tavares clenched his jaw, his pride screaming at him to fight back. But his body refused. Kane continued. We rely on something else, something stronger. He flexed his fingers, his knuckles bruised but steady. Endurance, adaptation, will. Tavares stared up at him, his mind struggling to understand. Kane had been holding back this entire time. Even with his armor, he had played it safe. But now he was fighting for real. The human did not need armor to be dangerous. He was the weapon. And in that moment, Tavares realized the truth. He had already lost. Tavares lay on the cold stone floor of the arena, his body aching, his mind spinning. He had fought many battles, had trained against the strongest warriors of his species, but never had he felt like this. His limbs trembled as he pushed himself up, his forearms unsteady beneath him. His pride told him to stand, to fight, to prove that he was still strong. But deep inside, he already knew the truth. He had lost. Not just in battle, but in understanding. Across from him, Sergeant David Kane stood, calm and unshaken. The human's body was bare of armor, yet he looked stronger than ever. His chest rose and fell in steady breaths. His fists, though bruised, remained relaxed. His eyes, those sharp, unyielding eyes, watched Heverus without arrogance, without cruelty. He was not mocking. He was teaching. Tavarus's mandibles twitched. He had thought humans were weak without their armor. He had thought they needed technology to survive. But now, as he knelt on the battlefield, gasping for breath while Cain stood tall, he saw the truth. The armor had not made Cain strong. Cain had made the armor strong. The silence in the arena was heavy. The Salichary warriors, once full of laughter and pride, were now watching in disbelief. Their strongest young warrior had fallen, not to claws, not to brute force, but to something far more dangerous: discipline, precision, adaptability. Cain finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Strength isn't just about what you're born with," he said. "It's about what you become." Tavarus swallowed, the words hitting deeper than any strike. "You Salichary," Cain continued, his gaze sweeping across the watching warriors. "You are born strong. You have natural weapons, natural armor. You grow up knowing you are powerful." He took a step forward. "But humans, we are born with nothing." Tavarus felt his claws dig into the ground. Nothing. How could a species with nothing become so dangerous? Cain's voice remained steady. "No claws, no exoskeleton, no enhanced muscles, just flesh and bone. We should be prey." His eyes narrowed. "But we aren't." Tavarus's breathing slowed as he listened. "We survive because we refuse to die," Cain said. "We fight, we suffer, we learn. We break, and then we get back up." He gestured to himself. "Every scar I have is a lesson. Every battle I've fought has made me stronger." Tavarus glanced at the scars on Cain's arms, the marks of countless fights. Cain's voice lowered. "That's why we don't need armor." His eyes locked onto Tavarus. "Because humans don't rely on what we are." A pause. "We rely on what we can become." The word sent a chill through Tavarus's body. His entire life, he had believed that strength was something you were born with. He had never thought of it as something you could build. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet. His muscles ached, his pride was wounded, but his spirit was awakening. Cain studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod, a warrior's respect. Tavarus took a slow breath and met his gaze. For the first time, he understood why the galaxy feared humanity. And for the first time, he did not laugh. Tavarus struggled to his feet, his legs shaking. His body ached, his pride burned, but his mind was in chaos. Never before had he felt so powerless in battle. Never before had he questioned his strength. And yet, standing across from him, unarmored and bruised but completely in control, was a human, a creature he had once thought weak. Sergeant David Cain watched him with steady eyes. He did not smirk, did not taunt. He simply waited. The arena was silent. The Salichary warriors, once filled with laughter and confidence, now stood motionless. They had all believed Tavarus would win. They had all believed humans were nothing compared to their strength. But now, that belief had shattered. Tavarus's claws clenched. He was the strongest of his generation. He had trained harder than anyone. He had fought and won countless battles. But this was different. His body was powerful. His claws were sharp. His exoskeleton was natural armor. He had every physical advantage. And yet, Cain had defeated him. Not with brute force, not with weapons, but with discipline, precision, control. Tavarus's breathing was heavy as he looked at Cain again. The human was not bigger. He was not faster. He did not have claws or natural armor. But he did not need them. Cain had beaten him because he had trained for this. He had studied his enemy, adapted to the fight, and used every weakness against him. Tavarus had fought with instinct. Cain had fought with knowledge, and that made all the difference. Cain took a slow step forward. Tavris stiffened, but Cain did not attack. His voice, calm and firm, cut through the silence. "You think strength is something you're born with," Cain said. His gaze was sharp, but there was no arrogance in his tone, only truth. Tavris's mandibles twitched. "That's why you lost," Cain continued. "You rely on what you are." He gestured to Tavris's exoskeleton, his 4 powerful arms, his claws. "You believe these things make you strong." Tavris straightened. "They do." His voice was rough, filled with lingering defiance. Cain shook his head. "No," he said. "They make you dangerous, but not strong." Tavris opened his mouth to argue, but something in Cain's expression made him pause. "We humans," Cain said, "are born weak. No claws, no armor, no natural weapons." He raised his hands, showing nothing but flesh and bone. "If we relied only on what we were born with, we would have died out long ago." Tavris listened, his heart pounding. "But we didn't die," Cain said. "We learned. We trained. We adapted. We made ourselves strong." He took another step forward. "You Salakri believe strength is given to you," Cain said. "Humans know strength is something you earn." Tavris felt something stir deep inside him, a feeling he had never known before. Not anger, not humiliation, understanding. For the first time, he saw the truth. Cain had not won because he was lucky. He had not won because of tricks or deception. He had won because he had built himself into a warrior. Tavris glanced at the Salakri warriors watching from the stands. Their faces were filled with shock, with disbelief, and with respect. They had all seen what he had seen. They had all learned the same lesson. Slowly, painfully, Tavris lowered his head. It was not an act of submission. It was not surrender. It was respect. Cain studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement, warrior to warrior. The fight was over. But Tavris knew his real training had only just begun. Tavris stood still, his breathing heavy, his body aching. The battle was over. The truth had settled deep in his heart. He had lost. But this loss did not feel like shame. No, it felt like awakening. Across from him, Sergeant David Cain stood tall, his bruised but steady body a testament to his strength. There was no smugness in his expression, no mockery in his stance. He had won, but he did not celebrate. That, more than anything, made Tavris understand the human. This fight had never been about pride. It had never been about proving dominance. It had been about teaching. And Tavris had learned. The silence in the arena was deafening. The Salakri warriors, once filled with arrogance and laughter, now stood motionless. Their strongest young warrior had fallen, not to brute force, but to discipline, skill, and sheer will. For generations, the Salakri had seen humans as lesser beings. They had thought them weak, reliant on technology, incapable of standing against a true warrior species. But now, they had seen the truth. Humans were not weak. They were relentless. They were unstoppable. Tavris took a slow, deep breath. His body ached, but his mind was clear. He had entered this fight as a warrior of the Salakri. He had expected to win, to show his strength, to prove himself. Instead, he had been humbled, and he did not resent it. Slowly, he stepped forward. Cain watched him, unmoving, waiting. Tavris bent slightly at the waist, a warrior's bow. Not one of surrender, but one of respect. The crowd gasped. A Salakri warrior never bowed to an outsider. It was unheard of, unthinkable. Yet, here was Tavris, their greatest young warrior, bowing to a human. Cain studied him for a moment, then, to the shock of everyone watching, returned the bow. Respect given, respect earned. The silence broke. The Salakri warriors, once doubtful, stamped their feet against the ground. a slow, rhythmic sound, a sign of acknowledgement. Tavares straightened and met Kane's gaze. "You have my respect, human," he said, his voice steady. Kane gave a small nod. "And you have mine." Tavares exhaled. He knew, deep inside, that this was only the beginning. That Saliqui would no longer laugh at humans. They would no longer underestimate them. And Tavares himself, he would train harder, fight smarter, become stronger. Not just for himself, but because now he understood. True strength is not what you are. It is what you choose to become. And he chose to become more.